Final Fantasy XIV patch 7.2 is just around the corner, but not everything is coming in this patch. And today I want to talk a little bit about content cadence and why it would be a terrible idea for them to release all the content at the same time. Because I've seen a little bit of the discussion on this line of people being disappointed. They're like, I was really looking forward to Occult Crescent, but that doesn't come out until 2 months in. Why do they do that? Why can't we do this right now? And I kind of wanted to talk about this from like a game dev design perspective and why it's important to pace these things out, right? That's kind of what I want to talk about. No negatives or positives about what's going on. Just kind of the design perspective. And to get to that, I want to show you these 3 variables. Whenever you're designing content in a live service game, the players themselves are a resource, right? That's why it's an online game. If you didn't have players as a resource, the game would feel perfectly fine to play completely solo. FF14 does not do that. WoW does not do that. World of Warcraft does not do that. RuneScape kind of can do that, actually, now I think about it. But you understand what I mean, right? The players are a resource that make the game entertaining for other players. Okay, so let's talk about these 3 variables and how they affect things. Anytime you add new content to the game, it's going to have a lifespan, right? It's just going to have a time at which players are no longer wanting to engage with the content. Take, for example, the new Extreme that we have. Now, that has a variable lifespan. There are some players that are not going to interact with it at all. That's fine. There's some players that are just going to clear it maybe 1 or 2 times, right? They just want to do the fight. There are some players that want their weapons, so alright, they're probably going to do 5-10 clears. They'll get enough to buy the weapon with their totem. There's players that want multiple weapons, and then there's players that want to get 99 totems to get them out. And then there's players beyond that even, that are like, not only do I want the mount, I want it this patch. I'm going to go even beyond 99 totems if I have to. So lifespan is a variable that we can mess around with. And if we make content more grindy, then obviously it has a longer lifespan and players will be playing it for longer. But we may not attract all players that way, right? There are some players that are just not going to be interested in that if it's grindy, and they're just not going to be doing the content. The second variable here, which affects that, is the player pool. Like I said before, not everyone's going to do all the content. Not everyone is going to do the extremes when they come out. It's a lot more than what I've seen people post about online. I know, for example, like on JP servers, it's something like a 30% clear rate of endgame players for Savage. So I have to assume it's that or more for Extreme. So this has got your player pool. And this is a really important statistic because in order for content to feel good and alive in the game, you need the player pool to be high. But as players burn through the content, they start to stop playing. And that player pool gets lower and lower and lower and lower over time. And eventually, it's going to reach a point where it's no longer good or no longer feels good or easy to actually just find a group for the content, right? We can take an extreme example of this, not an actual extreme fight, but let's say, for example, I brought up a party finder right now for Eden 8 Savage, a Savage raid from 2 expansions ago. I'm going to struggle to get a group, unless I say it's unsync, in which case people are doing it for the rewards, but I'm going to struggle to get a group. But at the time when it came out, it would have been very, very easy to get a group because the player pool was huge, because it was the current content, and because there was a huge amount of lifespan still in that content. All right? This is what they have to kind of manage here. Because the third variable is player time. And this is going to completely depend on every single player. How long can your player actually engage with the content and get something meaningful out of it? Right? For for some players, especially the ones that seem to always complain online, it's like 16 hours a day, right? It's people can manage to burn through your content ridiculously fast because they are playing the game all the time. But you still want your content to be enjoyable by the people who have less time to play, right? You don't want your content to have most of its player pool gone before the players who can only play on the weekends can get some enjoyment out of it. That's why extremes are pretty good. You have the players who don't have much time to commit to the game are probably going to go for the lesser rewards in the extreme, right? They're probably just going to go for the weapons or just go for the clear. So they don't need to dedicate too much time. But they'll be queuing in and party findering and duty findering on JP at least, with people who do want to do 99 clears. So you have this good mix mash of players, so the player pool gets really, really high. And now let's have a look at this with our 3 variables and how content is planned out with the cadence. 7.2 is going to release. We are going to get the MSQ, we're going to get a normal trial, an extreme version of that trial, and the normal Arcadion raid. 1 week later, we are going to get the Savage version of the Arcadion raid. 3 weeks after that, we're going to get the Crafter's Gatherer Zone Cosmic Exploration. And then 4 weeks after that, we're going to get Occult Crescent, the large exploration zone for combat jobs. Right? And the important thing here is that we want to give people enough time to fully dedicate themselves to one part of it and then move on to the next. Because I know that there's a lot of people who are like, I want just the Occult Crescent, but there's a huge amount of people in the game that want to do all of it, right? I want to do all of it. I do a lot of crafting. I do a lot of Savage. I do a lot of Bosja. I want to do all this content. It would be terrible if it all came at the same time, because the player pools for each game would have to fight each other. You would have people going into Occult Crescent. You would have people going into the Crafter Gatherer Zone. You have people trying to do Savage at the moment. And so you would have much smaller player pools for each bit of content, and it would feel less alive, right? Especially for the large-scale field content. I keep saying to people that Bosja is the first content to die in the game, right? Because Bosja requires a lot of people to feel good. Technically, you can go into Bosja with parts of it solo, but a small group you can go through, do Custom Lakasatore, do Delubrum Regine, do Zadnor, do Dalriada. But it's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel like the way the content was designed. It's meant to be large scale. It's meant to have a lot of people playing it. But if you have a small player pool, that doesn't feel good. And currently, a lot of the times on the Bosja Southern Front, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all. And weirdly enough, even though the player count in Zadnor is often a lot better because people go there to level, everyone is always doing the exact same bit of content in Zadnor. They're just doing the skirmishes up the top. So if you actually want to progress through there as a player, it still feels terrible because those players are not technically doing the same content as you. They're in the same zone, but there's no interaction there. So they give breathing time to all the jobs in the game. Right? They give breathing room to all the content in the game so you can go through and play it. Now, there's another interesting thing about this, and the reason I bring in this third variable, because this is also something that people brought up, is weekly lockouts and tone caps. Let's say you have players that are playing a little bit too much and burning through the content a little bit too fast, but it's really hard to add a grind to it. Savage is a really good example. Technically, you only need to clear the last fight, at worst, 8 times to get your weapon, right? You get your pity token to get your weapon. So it's not actually that much of a grind. It's so much an easier grind than extreme in terms of the actual amount of time spent on it, right? At least after you've cleared, right? Of course, learning is a different thing, but everyone learns differently, and you can have people learn the fight very quickly. So what they do with the weekly cap is they just kneecap the amount of playtime. They're like, no, you're not doing this. You are not putting in all this extra time so that the content becomes dead. And so the player pool stays higher for longer. And that's to the benefit of the game. Because what we've seen whenever they release the weekly lockout is you have players just immediately go all in on it. They run it super well for 1 week, right? Like there's a whole bunch of people running it, huge player pool, and then afterwards it just drops to nothing. It just drops to nothing because there's no actual need after that week that they've unlocked it for anyone to ever run the content again. The people who are going to put the time in to do it have done it, and the people who aren't are now in such a small player pool that they're going to struggle to find players to do it with. So that's why they tend to wait quite a bit of time. We talk about the idea of like waiting a set amount of time for releasing the Savage Locks. I think there might actually be them looking more at actual clear rates, right? They want the clear rate to be at a certain healthy percentage before they release this, because they know once they do release it, that clear rate is pretty much staying stationary. It's not going to increase because learning parties are gone. And I know people are like, well, learning parties aren't really there at the end of the life cycle anyway. And it's like, true, but there's some. There's not none that we get after the unlocking of Savage. So yeah, this is kind of just an interesting thing. Again, I wanted to do this like from game design perspective of whenever you think of any bit of content in the game, or whenever you have someone like say like, oh, they should do this or they should do that, right? Think about these 3 variables. Think about these 3 variables and how they will affect the content, and more importantly, they affect the other bit of content. And think about the minimum player pool that is required. Because we had stuff in Endwalker, Criterion. Now, certainly got a mixed reception on release. I think Hello Criterion Savage did a lot to remedy that with having really good rewards. So that attracted a longer lifespan, which meant that more people were interested in doing it over and over again. But the interesting thing about Criterion is that you can have the tiniest bit of a player pool and you can still get a group because it only requires 3 other friends, right? You only need to rope 3 other people into doing it and you can do Criterion, which means that it's much easier content to do over time. I've had people organize it with me to do Criterions. You can't really say the same thing about Delirium Regine Savage at all. So there's some interesting stuff here. I would be very interested in seeing how Cosmic Exploration and Occult Crescent is going to fare in the future. I do think currently as well, because of this, when Occult Crescent releases, Bosja is dead for a long time, right? There'll be very little reason for anyone to go through Bosja, which is why I've been telling my friends who haven't done Bosja yet, you need to do Bosja before Occult Crescent comes out, because then there will be no one in it. Right, I go in there sometimes to do like the 1v1s, and if I need certain items or I want to farm a certain specific thing, I'll go in there. But once Occult Crescent comes out, I'm like, no, that's my main thing. I need to do that instead. Even though I could still have some things to do in Bosja, I'm like, no, I need to do Occult Crescent. I need to do Craft and Gathering. I need to do the new shiny things. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you apply this kind of idea in the future whenever you maybe see like feedback on like, hey, the game should add this, the game should do that. Apply these very simple variables. Try to find out how it would work. Would it actually be a good addition? All right, goodbye.